If you're anything like me, and I've got a hunch that you might be given that you're listening to this podcast, you have spent quite a bit of time working on yourself, listening to books and podcasts, studying how your brain works, diving deep into spiritual paths. But eventually, you get to a point where you think, okay, well, this is all good in theory, but what about in practice? A few years ago, I couldn't shake the thought that I'd missed my chance to go live in an ashram somewhere and detach from the material world for a while. But then I realized, this is the opportunity. It's easy to feel enlightened when you're off in a cave or an ashram, but the real work is keeping your zen at Christmas with your mother-in-law. I used that analogy because it's apparently relatable, but I somehow lucked out with the easiest mother-in-law in the world. Her name is Penny, and the whole family talks about Pen Zen. So if it's more relatable, Thanksgiving dinner with your mother. It's our real lives that are the portals to our own awakening. When you can find the bliss in doing the dishes, the meditation in running on a trail, or find God in the brother that you haven't spoken to in years, that's when you truly start to understand what Zen is all about. Zen isn't about escaping the world. It's about embracing it fully, with all its chaos and beauty. It's about finding that stillness within, even when everything around you is a whirlwind. And to be honest, I still have my secret dream. Most women my age are planning a cruise when the kids grow up. I am planning my time in an ashram. But now I see it as just another facet of this human experience. Not an escape, not the way. Why do we think that way anyways? Vacations shouldn't be an escape. It's an integration. It's a part of it all. And sometimes just that shift in perspective changes the experience. Because the truth is, the real practice, whether it's integrating grief or immersing ourselves in absolute bliss, happens right where we are, whether it's at home on a Tuesday or basking in the Maldives. So today we're diving into how we can bring these Zen principles into our everyday lives, how we can transform mundane tasks into moments of mindfulness, and how we can navigate the complexities of life with a sense of calm and presence. Because the true test of Zen isn't how peaceful you feel in solitude, but how centered you remain in the midst of it all. Our guest is Katie Arnold. She's an award-winning journalist, longtime contributor to Outside Magazine, and author of the acclaimed 2019 memoir, Running Home. She's also a Zen practitioner and champion ultrarunner, and she teaches writing and running retreats, exploring the link between movement and creativity, wilderness and stillness. Her new book, Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, Zen and the Art of Running Free, is a spiritual guide and an exploration of how to be. I loved this interview. It's very conversational style, which are my favorite. And 3 key things that we will learn are how a radical use of present tense affirmations can reshape your reality, how to embrace boredom and repetitive activities as a superpower, and how to truly flow with life. I've hired a lot of people over the years, and I can tell you the biggest mistake that most business owners make. They think posting a job and waiting is a strategy, but it is not. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. Indeed, sponsored jobs helps you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so that you can reach the people you want faster, and it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. One of the things that I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring so fast because the best candidates are already there, actively looking. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. How fast is Indeed? Well, in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Can we talk about back to school chaos for a second? The kids are getting back into routines, everyone's schedules are crazy, and suddenly you're supposed to have dinner on the table every night like some kind of magician. But want to know what I figured out? Shopping, planning, and cooking food really can be simple and stress-free, which is why I love Hungry Root. Hungry Root takes the stress out of mealtime by filling your cart with personalized picks and planning your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. With over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, many ready in just 15 minutes or less, it's a huge lifesaver on those busy weeknights. I personally love their smart cart technology. It learns what I actually like and then recommends groceries, recipes, and supplements tailored to my tastes and needs. Plus, I love the kids' snack section where I get these really easy snacks to just keep in the car or throw in our to-go bags or lunch boxes for those of you who need them. They screen out over 200 additives, including high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners. They only source high-quality meat and seafood with no hormones or antibiotics, and they carry trusted brands like Oatly and Vital Farms. The time that I have gotten back has been incredible. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code MINDLOVE. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's be real about something. Workplace stress is not just part of the job anymore. 61% of people are dealing with stress levels that are way beyond normal, and it is not sustainable. I used to think that grinding through stress was some kind of badge of honor. Push harder, sleep less, ignore what your body was telling you. And it nearly broke me when I was working for startups. And look, maybe that voice in your head telling you to make a change is right. Maybe you do need to quit your job or completely flip your life. But whether you're making big moves or just trying to survive your current situation, you need tools to handle it well. And that's where therapy comes in. Modern therapy teaches you how to set boundaries without the guilt, how to trust your intuition instead of second-guessing yourself constantly, how to make better decisions from a place of clarity instead of chaos. And BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform with over 30,000 therapists. They've got a 4.9 rating from 1.7 million reviews because it actually works. You can talk to someone from anywhere, and you can switch therapists anytime if it's not the right fit. A vacation won't fix chronic stress, but the right support can help you navigate whatever comes next. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. My listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/mindlove. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mindlove.
Energetically, I was focused on the healing process. At the same time that I, wasn't holding too tightly, like this idea that I would have to run again. I wanted that more than anything. And the wanting is okay. That's good energy. But focusing each day on what I could do for the good of myself. And when I even had, and I wrote about this in the book, I had a physical therapist who, as he was working on my leg, wanted to talk to me about how bad running is for your body. And I had to stop him. And I was like, don't you see, like, you can't heal me with that energy.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
So in your book, you talk about the blend of running and Zen in understanding life. Can you talk about how these two activities intersect?
Oh, that's a great question. You get right to the heart of the book. Absolutely. Zen is anything you do with true spirit and determination. It's not, I don't think of Zen, and many people don't think of Zen as a religion, right? That's not about dogma or doctrine. It's about how you live in this life. And so Zen is really being yourself and making positive effort for the good every day and being as present as you can in your life. And so running for me has always been an expression of creativity and sort of how I feel like my most authentic self when I'm in the mountains. And so the two just naturally fit together. And of course, running is something that you do. And when you're doing it, you do have to make great effort, right? It's not always easy. And but when you show up with determination, that you're expressing Zen nature that way.
Tell me about that first time that you were drawn to the Zen Buddhist temple.
Are you talking about in the book itself?
Yeah.
When I'm going to give I'm going to give a talk, and it's late December 2018. And I've been sort of studying or practicing Zen for a little while by then. I was invited to give a talk at this well-known Zen center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I live, called Upaya Zen Center. And the talk was called The Zen of Running. And my wonderful friend, Natalie Goldberg, who's a fantastic writer and has written like 15 books and is probably best known for her book, Writing Down the Bones, which is a lot about writing and Zen. I mean, she's a legend. She and I have been friends, and she invited me to give this talk with her. I thought it was a great idea until, the day of the talk. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I have to get up in front of this room full of very serious Zen practitioners and sound like I know what I'm talking about. And Zen itself, by its very nature, is kind of hard to define, right? It's enigmatic. It's more of an idea, like I said, than a doctrine, or it's not about like submitting to a god or whatever. It's about how you live every day. And so I gave this talk, and it was really about how I had learned about through running and about running through Zen and about life through both of those things. And the talk then became kind of the structure for the book, Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, because it really tells the story that I told that night in that room full of Zen practitioners. And it went well. I was invited back. I was just there a few weeks ago giving a second Dharma talk. That's like a wisdom talk. And I wasn't quite as nervous the second time, but I still had that moment of like, what is Zen? When you try to pin it down, it's like seaweed. Like, what is it?
I love that story just because I talk to people all the time about imposter syndrome and just feeling unqualified, because there's always going to be people out there that know more than we do. And we sometimes forget that all of us are ahead of somebody. And sometimes it's even easier to understand those people because they're not so deep into it that they still remember how to bridge the gap. They can meet you where they are a little bit better than the people who have been speaking about it for a lifetime.
Yes, that's such a good point. I know I always need to remember that, because I tend to sort of do things not impulsively, but instinctively. So I have a really strong intuitive sense, and I'll sign up for something or agree to something. I'm big into receiving invitations because I feel like it's energy coming toward me. And I think it's a really good practice to meet that energy and receive it and accept an invitation. But oftentimes that means that like I'll be all in, and then I'll be driving to the event and having like a little panic of like, oh my God, what did I say yes to? And kind of the reality hitting it. But I think that just really means actually that there is a strong intuitive yes coming in from inside of me. And I try to live from that and honor that place. And then there's also a humility, or maybe like in its darker moments, an imposter syndrome that comes up. That's like, wait, I don't know everything about this. And actually, that's a wonderful thing, right? Our culture prizes expertise and mastery. And I think even when you have mastery over something, you can still be and have a beginner's mindset, which is a really open, wondrous, kind of refreshingly, non-judgmental way of approaching something. And that's very much what one of the lessons I learned during my recovery, and how I turned to Zen. Beginner's mind is a huge idea in Zen. And it just means even if you've been doing something forever, coming to it with a fresh, open mind of like, what will I learn today? And that's such a wonderful way of being. And so I really try to apply that to everything I do, even if it means getting up in front of a room and being like, oh God, what have I agreed to? And but I think we always know more than we think we do when we're speaking from the heart and from the inside, rather just from the head. When we're speaking from our wisdom rather than just our knowledge, we touch people in deeper ways, and it's more authentic, even if it's not maybe always as polished, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I found that so often we're focusing on delivering specific information. And a lot of times it's the story around that. It's the
Hmm.
little pieces that we skipped over because they were just parts of our lives that
Yes.
ends up hitting people the most. And it's like, oh, that's what meant something to you. I
Yes, that's the wisdom, I think. Right? So it's like we think we have to deliver the information, but it's actually what people want is the wisdom.
Yes, I try to keep a beginner's mind. And one of the ways I do that with this show, because I want to meet people where they are.
Mhm.
I want to go deep and I want to meet people where they are and I
Yeah.
want to pull them with me. And
Yeah.
one of the things I do is I actually keep a document called Language of My Customers. And whenever I get an email, when somebody describes their problems or their desires or something in a specific way, I just paste it in here. That way I can constantly refresh and make sure that
Oh,
I'm not going too deep, or I at least will say the deep thing and then say it in a way where I can meet them exactly how they speak. And whether people
I
realize I do
love
that or
that.
not, I think that's why I get a lot of comments where people are like, it feels like you're talking to me. And I'm like, you emailed
Yes.
me a
Well,
year and 3 days ago, and I was talking to you.
that is such a wonderful example of beginner's mind, right? Because you have a lot of mastery in this area, and but you're willing to see it fresh every day. There's a famous quote from a book that was really meaningful to me, and I quote a lot in Brief Flat Things in the phenomenal world called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And it's classic Zen text. It applies to sort of everything we do in life, but in the prologue, it really sums it up by saying, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And don't we all want to live in a world and a mind with so many possibilities rather than like this narrow tunnel vision?
It's so true. I love
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And that's why I worked with enough companies where we do marketing, and it's like we think we have all the answers, but then you go talk to somebody who knows nothing about it, or it's the intern or something, and they'll
Yeah.
say something. It's like, why didn't we think of that? And so
Yes.
it's so important to
Right.
get out of our bubble. But I know that you talked about that book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and how it influenced your healing process. And we skipped completely over so far your running injury. Tell us all
Yeah.
about it and how that book helped you, or at least influenced that healing.
Yes, that's a great question. Yes. So I was in a really traumatic wilderness accident in the summer of 2016. And I have always been a runner. And before the accident, I was a competitive ultra distance runner. So that's anything over 26 miles. And I was winning a lot of races. And but my husband and I got invited to go on a wilderness river trip, like so whitewater rafting up in Idaho. And we've had a lot of experience river rafting. We do that a lot. And it wasn't new to us, but it was a 6-day trip. And on the first day, we had this fluke accident where we got pinned up against a rock and our raft flipped. And we both went in the water. And I knew as soon as I hit the water that I was injured and that I had injured my leg pretty badly. And so the crazy thing is that we ended up staying on the river. It was, a very remote river nicknamed the River of No Return. So there's no roads along it. There's no way out except by if you call like for an evacuation, they can get a bush plane in. And so we ended up staying on the river for 6 days. I didn't know, that my leg was as injured as it was, but that was kind of the beginning of this deeper experience of Zen practice, because staying on the river, badly injured and as much pain as I was in, required that really deep concentration, almost meditative state that Zen is about, which is, focusing right on the present, being right where you are, not, downriver. And it's 100 miles of river and there's 100 major rapids in 100 miles. And I think we flipped at mile 3. So we had 97 more miles and 97 major rapids and to get through. And I knew that I could not fall out of the boat again. So I had to stay safe. And to do that, I had to get very intentional. I could only think and worry about the rapid we were on. And when you're on a river, you can't see more than the bend you're on, right? You can't see 5 bends downstream. You can't see, the rapids to come. You can only see the one you're on. And that became kind of my mantra for getting through that week was, one rapid at a time. And it really actually works in all of life, right? Because there's always rapids, even if you're not on a river, there's always rocks and bumps and things that come and obstacles that come up in our way. And if you take it one rapid at a time, right, you're not spinning out in anxiety of what's to come. You're really intentional with what is happening now.
That's actually what I love about trail running is it's such a meditation for me because you have to watch only your next foot. Really.
Yes.
It's like where it's going to land so you don't roll your ankle, because it's not just, I mean, you can't just keep your eyes ahead. There's rocks and things.
I know. I love that about it too. And that it's never, it's not you deciding your pace. You have to work with the terrain. You have to work, in my case, with the mountain, you know, because I do a lot of mountain running. You have to moderate yourself to fit the environment. And it's such a great practice because I think, especially in our world now, we're, you know, we like to think we're in charge and, you know, everything is about how we want to do things. And it's really like when we're in the mountains, they're such teachers because, you know, if it's straight up the mountain, you know, you could think you're going to want to run a 6-minute mile, but you're going to run what you can run on the mountain. And like you said, you have to moderate your pace and your footsteps and your stride to the landscape. And isn't that a wonderful way of being, you know, rather than the norm, which is just often a disregard for the natural world.
You seem to be the type of person that finds lessons in ordinary moments. Were you like this before your accident?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I've always been this way because I've always had I've had a lifelong relationship with the natural world, and that's just like I'm happiest outside, and I've always been an outdoor athlete. But yeah, the accident really sort of helped clarify for me some of these, you know, really old, timeless, very almost simple teachings of Zen. And you had asked how they helped me heal. And so we can talk about that now, but some of those teachings are just so, I don't want to say simple, but like common sense, like just ways of being, which is one of them is that there's these little moments of awakening all the time available to us happening. And I call them, that's sort of what the title of the book is about, brief flashings in the phenomenal world, these little hits of wonder where we're like, oh, I'm alive. Right. And we see something differently, or we feel connected to the place we are, or with our own imagination, or with our body, with those we're with. And it's that feeling of oneness and wonder. And they're very ordinary moments, you know, it could just be like the light coming in through the window, or, you know, they don't have to be peak experiences. But my accident, being in that very dark place after I got home from the river and learned that I would have to have surgery, and that my doctor, you know, basically told me I should never run again, you know, and that's a very dark place to be. After I think I sort of was in the darkness and allowed myself to be there. And that's part of it. You know, when you resist the darkness, it gets worse. So having sort of an awful summer of that, and I know, you know, I was not a joy to live with, right? Being injured and facing losing one of the things that's most dear to you, both as a mental health practice and a creative practice. And so learning to find the ordinary joys in the world, like I'd had a, you know, proclivity for that. I learned that a lot from my mother, who is very much like that and sees these little, you know, hits all the time. And also from my father, who was a National Geographic photographer, and he was conditioned to look for those moments of connection and authenticity, and just those little flashes that show us that we're alive. And so, yes, I've always been like that, but this and sort of learning more about Zen deepened this for me, and to realize not only that the flashings are outside, but we ourselves are the flashings. And like this conversation we're having right now, this connection is a flashing, and to sort of live from that place. And the flashings aren't just in beautiful peak experiences or joyful moments. They can also be in times of struggle and darkness. And that's a real comfort. And I think it's a shift in the way we think of things, because we often think just like, oh, peak experience, like, you know, when you win the biggest race or you do something amazing. But really the flashings are always there. And, it's just a matter of remembering to look.
I used to live my life really seeking the peak, and I was just sort of addicted to thrill in all the ways. I would just do risky things and my motto was like, this will make a good story later. Will it make a good story? I might get arrested, but let me try it. And
I love it.
And I even got into, I got certified in skydiving, just things like that.
I was going to say, I'm feeling like there's skydiving in this story.
Yeah. And then once I got the certification, I actually never wanted to go again. But but then I met my husband, and he would stop on drives and like just look at the view. And I just wasn't used to that in my 20s. I was used to like going to a party and doing Molly or something, I got a peak experience in my pocket. It's better than the sunset. But over the time that our relationship developed, he would just share different things. And he was so good at bringing the gratitude for the moment, or just the wonder and the awe for the everyday. And I asked him once where he got that from. And he said he thinks it was his mom. His mom was just good at really taking in the views and the beauty. And now knowing her probably is that she lives in the middle of the woods, and she just likes her birds and feeding her 20 cats and whatever it is. And so now that I have children, it's such a good accountability for like, okay, well, I can see the two ways of people being just by the way that they're raised. How can I instill some of the things that I really want them to take through their life by just bringing attention to it? And rather than telling them the way they should be, but just like say, look how beautiful that is. And so it's something that I do now. And it's so awesome because just by doing that practice, it brings it into my life more. But it's fun sort of seeing things click. My oldest is still only 3, but he is the type who will say, it's a beautiful day to be a wife.
Exactly right. So he sees the flash, and kids really do see them. And then it's sort of like, and they're such great teachers for that reason, because they do see them more because they have fewer responsibilities and to-dos, and hopefully, please, they don't have screens, like we can keep them off screens for long enough that they can remember to see them. But, Zen, one of the ideas of Zen, again, not as a religion, but just sort of as a life philosophy, is that the only constant is impermanence and change, right? And so knowing that everything has this impermanence kind of makes you want to pay attention more, because things are always changing. And it's like, and we know that as parents, right? Nothing makes it more apparent than our children growing up before our eyes. Like 5 minutes ago, my daughter was 3 and now she's 15. And, it's just like, everything. And you could just like bathe in the wonder of their own development, which isn't to say there's not like really awful days when you're like, like serenity, and both are true at the same time. Like it can be so much work to be a parent, and it's so beautiful at the same time. And I think it's that sense of like no dualities. It's both of those things at the same time is really a teaching of Zen, that we can hold the incredible joy and the sorrow at the same time, and the frustration and this just wonder at our children. And so it's really like, I think learning more about Zen has sort of brought out these, natural characteristics of myself to see and look for those moments. And also just to find peace and be like, it's okay that I'm having a bad day. Meeting it and seeing myself in that way is Zen, right? Pushing it away and trying to, pretend it's not there isn't, Zen is just meeting the world as it is in each moment. And, it doesn't mean you're always peaceful.
For sure.
Sure.
Something to filter your own suffering through. I have a 1-year-old also, and oh my goodness, I love this phase. I keep saying I can't decide if he's just way easier or if it's just easier being a parent the second time around.
Probably both, a little. Yeah, both, right.
But it's like, I don't want this to end at all. And I'm so curious to see. I'm having an easier time being just present with it, because I know that even clinging is resistance, which is suffering. And so it's all about just like letting it be, letting it flow. And I think that's what's making this so much easier, or more enjoyable. It's easier to just focus on the good, because I'm not in anticipation of his next word. And I'm not sitting there like, I kind of am. I wish this was forever. This smushy little face. He's so sweet. But it reminds me of one of the things that you talk about that you say is the first rule of rivers and Zen,
Mhm.
and it's to not fight the current. Can
Yeah.
you talk more about that?
Yeah. So, like I said, I've spent a lot of time on rivers in my life, and in kayaks and rafts and canoes, and you learn from a river that you kind of have to go the pace of the river, right? Like sometimes it's swift water and you're moving quickly. Sometimes it's a very slow, lazy river and you're going more slowly. Sometimes there's lots of rapids and it's busy and you have to, work to stay upright. But the bottom line is that the river has its own energy and its own pace. And when we move with it, right, we learn to adapt to the river's energy. And that's kind of like when you think about life, we can flow with life, with what's happening in life, or we can resist everything and grip against it. And just like in the river, you probably can go upstream. It's a lot of work and you really don't get anywhere. And so in life, it's learning to stop resisting the changes as they come, but to sort of soften toward them. They're not all going to be easy or pleasant, right? Life just throws those things at us, and loss, and certainly there's so much so much hardship right now in the world. And so it's not like putting a Pollyanna-ish face on things and being like, everything's fine. It's actually flowing with the hard times too, and not pushing them away or faking it, but just being right there in the current of your life. And sometimes it's hard and rough water, and sometimes it's smooth and easy, and learning to go with it rather than against it. And that's a constant practice, right? Isn't that a daily practice that we all have to do? Because it's not like you just get there and you're like, nailed it forever, I'm going to go with the flow. New things arise. Things arise for me every day where I have to remember, oh, I could push against this, or I could find the angle where I could go with it. And that's not about being passive, right? That's not just like, oh, letting life happen to you. And that's a misperception, I think, about Zen, but it's actually like quite rigorous to be present and to see your true emotions as they are and to let them come rather than push them away.
This actually just came up. I was leading a coaching call earlier with my group coaching program, and the concept of surrender and just shifting what that actually means.
Yeah.
And so often, like you said, we think it's like this passive thing where we're not doing anything anymore.
We're not trying. It's like we're not trying. And it's not that way at all. You're making such effort to be present. And it's like a positive effort. Yeah, surrender is such a loaded word. It sort of seems like you're giving up. And I think the only thing you're giving up is resisting, which is suffering, and I don't know, I can use an example in the case of my book, right? Like, so my book is out in the world and I'm making a lot of effort every day on its behalf, but I'm just allowing it to be and find its way in the world while, helping it find its voice, but not attaching to any specific result or holding on. Do you know what I mean? And it's easy, it's hard or it's easy to want things for yourself and to want success. And we're ambitious humans. I mean, that's just normal. And it's not about throwing away your ambition, but about really making effort in the moment and then releasing your idea of what you want to happen. And that's that tricky balance.
I have found this view through, I love just studying different religious texts, and I like finding the through line, like what are the commonalities? Because for me, that's probably closest to the truth. And it's interesting. I was raised Christian. Now I am more just broadly spiritual. I'm just looking for the connection with God, universe, all the things. Right. And so I love studying like Ram Dass, Alan Watts. And it's interesting now learning from other spiritual traditions and then going back to some of the Christian texts I was raised with and seeing it through a different filter. And it's just interesting. And I now understand this idea of like willpower versus God's will. And I never understood that as a kid, because I'm like, what do you mean? We have free will, but God's will will always be done. Like, this doesn't make sense to me, which one is it? And now I look at it, A Course in Miracles really brought some insight in the way that they talk about it. But talks about basically just being open. And really when we're overthinking too much, the ego gets involved. We stress ourselves out. We create that internal and external resistance. And if instead we just open to the flow, I look at it now like an ecosystem, like if we zoom all the way out, like of the without human intervention, all of our ego intervention, the forest is just foresting, it all works. It continues to grow. The birds continue to be birthed. And if we get out of our own way and just meet the signs with our own energy, really, I'll change the word from even effort to energy, because effort seems to hold a connotation. And I feel like as much as we can strip away the meaning that we've already given things, it's almost easier to fall into. But it's like, I'm now just open to like, what are the signs of the next thing? And it's like, okay, this is where I'm being led. And then I just put my all into it. And then
energy is a good word, or I think of it as expression. Like, what is our true expression? Yeah. And when we act from that place of true expression, we're always on the right path. You know what I mean?
We're doing our place in that ecosystem. We are one of the divine ants in the ant farm.
Right.
It's not just about us. It's about the whole of everything. And we're doing our highest part by meeting it there. So yes, it takes a lot of energy. And also, yes, releasing attachment to the outcome
is so important. And it's not really, that's not a popular topic in this culture, because it makes, we feel again, like we're being passive, and it's not passivity. It's actually like a deep practice. And results can follow, right? I mean, when we release the need for results, that's oftentimes when the results do come. And that's kind of what I write about after my accident in brief flashings is, when I let go of needing a certain thing from running again, or even knowing if I would ever run again. When I started running again, my way was so different. And I ended up having this incredible outcome that, I never could have imagined. And that, going back to that quote of like, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. My doctor or surgeon had one possibility for me, which is that I should never run again. And I chose to see through a lens where, many things could happen. And actually the thing that did, I couldn't even imagined it, like the human imagination, thank goodness we're not limited to it, because it's not as vast as all the possibilities in the whole world. Right. And that power that's out there and that, we can tap into. So that's just the perfect expression of that, of like, letting go of a certain narrative and opening to all possibilities.
So how did you get there, and what was your process with keeping that open mind? Because I know, especially when people are facing their worst case scenario or what they think might be, it's really easy to get that tunnel vision. But then the other side is there's a whole philosophy where it's like, visualize exactly what you want. But how did you keep that just openness? And then how did you begin running again?
Yeah, great question. So I did all the things, like I followed the PT protocol. I was a very good patient and I was patient. So, I will say that that's, even though I used a lot of Zen for my mind state and sort of like healing my mind, I did really follow the Western medical protocols of healing. And so I did all the PT, but what I learned is that it mattered what I was saying to myself. And that self-talk, I guess you'd call it. And so even though I was scared that what the doctor said might come true, I had a practice of writing in my notebook. And I've always kept notebooks or journals. And I would write in my notebook, not I will heal completely, but I am healing. And that, present tense makes a big difference. And I would write to myself these sort of affirmations that I am healing. And at first, I started just writing, my body is healing. And then I even tweaked that a little. I was like, it's actually like I'm healing myself. Like, and I took ownership over that process. And it sounds sort of like just semantics. And as a writer, I can geek out on that, but I think that sort of writing to yourself or speaking to yourself in this way of self-belief is so important. It's not even delusional, it's not wishful thinking. It's every day I would do the work of going to physical therapy, and then I would get on my bicycle trainer in the backyard with only one pedal, and I would spin one-legged. So I knew, and then I would sit outside. I got a lot of vitamin D to heal my broken bones, and I had friends coming over, so I had a lot of love input and those important things. I knew whatever the outcome was, that I am healing myself through these processes. And then I was really careful not to spend a lot of energy on talking about my accident. People hear, how dramatic it was, and they want the blow by blow, literally. And I would always tell them, and then I would try to shift the subject to like, here's how I'm healing myself. So that just energetically, I was focused on, the healing process. At the same time that I wasn't holding too tightly, like this idea that I would have to run again. I wanted that more than anything. And the wanting is okay. That's good energy. But focusing each day on what I could do for the good of myself. And I even had, and I wrote about this in the book, I had a physical therapist who, as he was working on my leg, wanted to talk to me about how bad running is for your body. And I had to stop him. And I was like, don't you see, like, you can't heal me with that energy. And he looked at me like, he'd never thought of that before. But so it was really about putting myself in a state, I won't even just say of positivity, though I was trying to be positive. It was possibility. It was kind of radical possibility. And I did do some writing exercises, and they weren't intentional visualizations, but the kind of writing practice I do, I'll just give myself license to write, like free write for 10 minutes. And one time I found myself writing about running a 100-mile race, which I'd never done before. And I visualized, the flowers, the wildflowers, and so many specifics that after I wrote it, I felt like I'd been running. It was I had the same endorphin rush. And I knew in that moment that writing about running was healing me for running. And it would be months later before I ran again. And then a whole year before I remembered that I'd written that. And then I entered my name into the lottery to run 100 miles.
That's so incredible. I'm reminded of, there's a book called The Expectation Effect that talks about, and this book has no spiritual context whatsoever. It's all about just the science of it. And he talks about how the best scientists know that their own biases are going to affect the outcome. And so there's no blind studies whatsoever.
Right.
Because all you need is just an idea or just an expectation, and that can affect an outcome that's behind a glass wall. Even you don't even need to touch it.
Of course. So like their energetics, their energy can affect. Wow. I mean, I'd not heard of that, but that makes total sense to me, because I do think, this showed me the power of the mind. Again, I was doing the physical things. It wasn't like I was just, throwing it all to the wind and just, power of belief, like magical thinking. But the two hand in hand, doing the work, the rehab, and writing my way into possibility seemed to be sort of the formula that worked.
And back to what I was saying about looking at religious texts I was raised with a broader scope of meaning. Another thing I found fascinating, what you mentioned, is writing it in that present tense of like, I am. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something that my personal beliefs is that it's misinterpreted in the Bible, and it's what created this whole thing when potentially certain people were trying to say something different, because there's a lot of spiritual traditions that use those words, I am, to claim a unity with the divine, to kind of identify their true self over their ego self. And so it's just interesting.
Wow.
Some people take that as the monopoly of, no, it's just this one person that is the gateway to God. And it's like, no, he was claiming that. How I see that is and from some of the texts that never made it into the canonical Bible, it, it seems to me that he's claiming this unity with the divine, and through doing that is how it became so. Whereas some
Right.
people
So
are like, "Oh, it's the only person."
and I was raised Episcopalian, but that, none of that resonated with me. And I was, kind of, I didn't connect with it. But it is in Zen, you would kind of call what you're talking about actualization, right? So you're actualizing like Buddha nature, which is sort of oneness and connection with all beings. In in the book that I'm talking about, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, the Zen master who was from Japan, and he actually passed away in 1971. And this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, is a collection of his Dharma talks before he died. He believed, and this was sort of from a long lineage of Zen masters, that we don't sit or meditate to become enlightened. We are already enlightened, or we already have awakened nature, right? It's in us, it's our inherent, what we come into the world with. So rather we sit or we meditate or we do whatever our practice is to express that enlightened nature. And so we already have that knowing and everything we need inside of us. It's kind of like the idea of the brief flashings, like the brief flashings are in us. And it's just a matter of practicing and remembering that, and knowing that we are the flashings and we can express them through just our very being, whatever we do, whether we're runners or writers or entrepreneurs or, doctors, whatever. And so, that idea of actualizing, and so holding something and believing it, and then you manifest it.
When you were sharing your healing story, I just am reminded of my sister-in-law. She found out she had to get adult braces. Mm-hmm. There was like a tooth that was stuck that wasn't going to come in, and they basically needed to like pull it down, a whole thing. Mm-hmm. And she was just like, really? I'm getting married next year. I'm going to have adult braces now. And she was not stoked on it. But then she just decided to go all in, and she spoke to her teeth. She just like look in the mirror and be like, thank you for moving. Like,
yes,
saying it as it was. She just got her braces off. I feel like she just got them on. It happened so fast.
Yes.
Her dentist orthodontist kept saying, I can't believe these are moving this fast. This is wild. We've never seen anything like it. And I have a crooked jaw. Well, I found this whole rabbit hole online where you can actually, it's called mewing, but you can stretch your jaw. Our jaws have gotten a lot narrower over time as we evolve. And so there's a whole thing. Anyways, and so I was doing the exercises every day, and then it's just this repetitive thing. And I'm like, I got to get back to doing those exercises.
Yeah.
One of the things you talk about is kind of embracing boredom and the challenges of just maintaining interest in repetitive activities.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of people go wrong, because it's like, okay, I showed up to meditation 11 days in a row, and then it's out the window, or okay.
They resist it. Yeah, we resist boredom when it's actually, I think, this great catalyst for creativity and insight and imagination. And again, and also none of us have a chance, I feel like, to be bored anymore, because we have these little devices on our palms that can like take us anywhere. Soon I feel like they're going to be in our eyeballs, and daydreaming becomes even harder. But yeah, boredom, facing, kind of doing that repetitive practice. And, in the Zen tradition, that's what meditation is. And I will say, like, I have a sitting meditation practice, but I'm also a very active person and I get restless. So, my sitting practice, just in case anyone's listening and it's like, I have to meditate for, hours every day. I mean, maybe 10 minutes is what I do. And I believe anything counts, right? Like everything counts. And so to sit still, just outside with my coffee and listen to the birds and breathe is a meditation practice. And in Zen, it's really showing up to do your practice, whatever it is, for me, it's also writing and running. So showing up every day to run or to write and sit down and work on my next book, even on the hard days or the days when my body hurts or I feel like I don't have anything to say on the paper, that's kind of the highest form of practice, and sort of meeting that boredom, that resistance, and going toward it. And when you meet your boredom, you actually find it's like, I don't know, you're probably too young for this, but the children's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where she goes to the closet. 40. Yeah. Okay. Well, she goes to the closet and, at first it's just coats. And then she's like, whoa, there's something out there. And that's like, I kind of feel like the boredom feels like a brick wall, but when again, meet it rather than resist it, it can lead you into sort of the most fascinating places of your own imagination. And so I'm a huge proponent of boredom, and I feel like we don't allow ourselves to be bored enough. I mean, that's really when daydreaming pops in, right? And sometimes we want to quit because we think everything needs to be exciting now, those peak experiences. And really, those repetitive practices are some of the most, I think, insightful things we do. And it's also, this is a big thing for me. It's about having a relationship with both your mind and your body. And, for me, I write about in the book running up the same mountain every day. And I was having a relationship with the mountain. I could see it on rainy days, on sunny days, in winter and summer. And boy, it's wonderful to have a connection to the natural world that way. And, it's also illuminates our own connection to ourselves, right? We learn so much about ourselves when we learn about, the wilderness.
That relationship, Ram Dass, was it Ram Dass or it might have been Alan Watts? He talks a lot about Taoism and just the interesting perspectives of different cultures and the way they view things. And one of the things he talked about is portraits. China or in certain Asian countries, often the person's actually really small and it's a huge landscape and they're just like sitting there. And so it shows that they see the unity a little bit more of all things. Whereas us, it's like just the up close, you could see all the whiskers on the guy's face or whatever.
Right. It's the selfie and the mountain is like tiny in the background. It's the exact opposite of those like Japanese painters, right? When it's like the huge waves and these teeny tiny boats in the foreground. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I know. It's that kind of, and that's also a humility, right? That like the natural world is so vast and is the ultimate, like we'll have the last say. We may not continue, but the planet will in one form or another. And yeah, it reminds us that we're just part of a much larger natural order, which I find reassuring, right? Because when you have a bad day and it's like, oh, this or this little thing happened, when you look at it in the big scheme of like, I look out the mountains, I look out the window, I see the mountains, like the mountains or the forest have seen everything over time. And it makes my problem seem small, which brings me a certain peacefulness.
I like to think about that. About a year and a half ago, I did an episode. Have you ever heard of the headless way? The philosophy?
Yes.
So Douglas Harding was the philosopher who inspired that. But when I was doing my research for that episode, I came across a self-portrait by Ernst Mach. And the self-portrait actually just looks like his view. You can see the table that his legs are rested up on, and then the rest of the room and the window in front of him. And something about this philosophy really changed the way I relate to my life and the world. And sometimes it's like we get in our bubbles and we wonder why we feel stuck. And it's like, well, you haven't even changed your view. And if we really consider that we are everything in general, but then especially we're taking in the things that are of our senses and everything that we input, whether it's the things that we watch on TV, the things that we hear, the people we hang out with, all of that is creating our worldview, which creates our identity and who we are. And so I've become I don't like using the word religious. I've become very adamant about, I call it my circle of influence. And I used to love psychological thrillers. I just won't watch them anymore. And I'm like, what will life be like if I only input the ways that I want to be, the things that I want to learn? And I've been trying that for a couple of years now. And
how's it going?
Drastically changed. Like everything about my life has drastically changed. It's very rare for me to be in a bad mood other than like when I'm PMSing. And even then it's just like snappier comments every now and then. And as long as my husband doesn't attach to them,
so it's like being mindful of what you're absorbing and taking in. So like that's kind of takes me back to that physical therapist I had who was like, that's so bad for your knee. And it's like, wow, that's not aligned with like my intention here, which is to heal. And so you just do that across
momentum with me. Help me with the energy moving this way. What's this?
Right. And so you just cut out the stuff that's not going to feed you.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, tell me again, the headless way. It's like we see the world like and not our heads.
Yeah, it's like imagine And there's all these exercises to basically disidentify with what you usually identify with. And so you can log into their website and just these little thought experiments for free. But for me, the way I like to view this is I almost imagine, what if I'm not the one moving and the universe is moving through?
Yes.
And so I focus on it a lot on my walks. I do like a meditative walk, and I'm just like, what if I have no control over any of this? And it's just, what is the way that I'm embracing what's moving through me? And then it helps me meet that more. Like, I have a 3-year-old. This age is a lot.
Yes.
Also,
Sure
it depends on the week. Sometimes it'll be a bad week and I'm like, how am I going to survive? And then it'll be an amazing week. And I was like, that wasn't so bad. Oh, that was only like 4 days. And I thought it was forever. Anyways, but even that, it's just like, can I just let this move through me? Can I just integrate this instead of contracting? Can I expand into this moment? And that's really the biggest change it created for me.
That's amazing. I had a crazy experience like that. Not crazy, that's the wrong word, like a very illuminating one on one of my many runs, right? And running very long distances, you can get into kind of a hallucinatory or very transcendent state. And I think, you were talking about your like partying days before. I think that's always, like, I've always been sort of, a goody two shoes about that stuff, but that's kind of how I have these transcendent experiences by running long distances. But I was in the desert once doing a 50-mile race a few years ago. And it was like in December. And so it should have been really cool, but it was forecast to get into the mid 80s that day. And we started at dawn, at 6 a.m. And I just remember running and watching the sky and being like, oh my God, the minute that sun is up, we are going to be just seared for, 8 hours. But as I was running, I saw things beside me on the trail that, you always see rocks, whatever. And I remember thinking, I'm not seeing the rocks, they're seeing me. And, that is that same idea of like, we are always just through our lens. But what is it like to see from, the tree's point of view or the rock? And it was just the wildest, it was a brief flashing in the phenomenal world. It was just this moment of interconnection and kind of just great smallness on my part, and I loved it. Like, I'll not, and I'm sure I'll write about it in my next book. But it was just a wonder, and I think that's kind of the headless way.
Yeah, sounds exactly. And sometimes it's just that little shift in thought. I call them just thought experiments.
Yeah,
of a new way to think about something, and I think it's so empowering to do that because you can practice it in these little, almost meaningless moments, although all moments can have meaning and they can also have none if you want. But practice them in these little easy moments that you don't have an attachment to. And then it becomes easier doing it in another facet of life. Like Byron Katie does that sort of flip it around a lot. And I've used it in difficult relationships where I'm like, why is she this way? And it's like, okay, if I think that why can't she just understand me? Why is she always trying to change me? I'm like, by this very nature of that question, am I not trying to change her? Like, what would happen? I think that I would be better if she was easier, but maybe if I were being easier, it would just resolve itself. And so often that's how it works, but it's just this slight twist in how we're looking at something that just helps us to release our story and leave opportunity for another one. Another very simple way that I do that is, how a lot of times we tell stories, and I notice it a lot on reality dating shows. It's really the only guilty pleasure I have because I don't feel like it gets me feeling a whole lot. But people in general, when they tell stories, they'll say like, well, you get up there and you think this is going to happen. And in my mind, since they're saying you to everything about their experience, it's just this illustration of how we are projecting our experience onto everyone else. So when I notice myself doing that, which is rarely now, but I'm sure listeners of this show will notice a lot of times I'll say, well, you know how when you do that, when I am in that situation, and I'll just bring it back to me. And that very simple thing allows for more possibility, as
more possibilities, right?
Before, it's like, no, this is how I'm doing it, but it's not the only way, and it's not the default way. And just because I think this makes the most sense doesn't mean that everybody else is going to handle it this way too. And it doesn't even just open it for other people. It'll actually shift the way I look at it, where I'm like, and then in that moment, I'm like, oh yeah, there's 1,200 other ways to
Yeah,
think about.
right. There's 8 billion of us on the planet. There's probably 8 billion other possibilities. I know that is such a refreshing way to look at it. I too have that. And I sometimes just call it the 180, or even it's like the 90. If you can come at something not head on with that sort of fixed or very positioned place of like being, defending a position, but and me too, the elapsed time from when I feel that position coming on and when I can shift it has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, so that there's this nimbleness in kind of how I think. But the first clue is, oh, I feel really tight about something. So can I just and I'm doing this, I look like I'm peering around the corner. Can I just peer at it from a slightly different angle? And when you do, like you were saying, that 180 or even that little shift in degrees can show a whole new possibility, or something that you had been previously too positioned to think of. And boy, is it freeing. I mean, again, and that's just like you were saying, it just takes practice to do it. But now, and we all get into those defensive modes, but it's like, how quickly and nimbly can we shift from that? And I think that there's so much less rigidity when we can look at something from a slightly different angle, and so many more possibilities.
Well, and like you talked about earlier, of doing the visualization, going through something to where you can feel it when it's easy, and then it'll be easier to physically show up and practice.
Yeah.
I'm always sharing don't begin your Zen practice during an argument when you're triggered.
Right.
It's easier to just maybe come up with some things that you'd say. I was just sharing about how when I was figuring out, I used to be horrible at saying no to people. And so I actually Googled ways to say no, and then I'd practice in front of the mirror and there was nothing I was saying no to. But then all of a sudden I had practiced certain things that I could come to when those moments of contraction where I felt like people pleasing. And so I would love to give listeners one specific practice for them to practice in their easy times, just to ground all of what we've talked about into the real world, since so often we take in so much information and then we never apply any of it. So I like to make it easy with one thing.
Yeah.
What work would you leave for people?
I mean, I think the one thing would be just go outside your door in the morning, like the first thing, and bring your cup of coffee, but just go outside your door and look around and notice the sky. Are there clouds? What do they look like? Hear the birds. There's no assignment. It's not homework. You don't have to write any of it down. Just be in it. And the poet Mary Oliver, who's one of my favorite writers, and she died a few years ago, would do that. She talked about how she would go outside her door every morning with her coffee and her notebook. And, as a writer, she would write things down. But I love that image because it's just this act of receiving and noticing. And there's nothing really more to Zen than that. It's just notice the world we're in and see it. And, feel the sun on your face or the rain, and see how your day shifts just with that practice. And it's a practice, we need to show up for it. And it's really pleasurable. It's not work at all.
I love that you brought in the word receiving. I feel like that's been my biggest realization in the last few years, is how to get into that mode of receiving. And for a long time in my spiritual studies, it just felt like this elusive, I didn't fully understand the concept, but it's just like we were talking about with that Taoistic view of being a part of all that is. We are all one, and it's hard to really fathom, but we are so stuck in our heads overthinking. And I just imagine that as building up your hard candy shell, as I call it. You're just reinforcing your ego and your one perspective, versus just can be as simple as that. Just notice around you. I like to add the dimension of being a part of it, just being within it, knowing that it's all connected. So thank you so much. I loved talking to you. I feel like I want to do monthly Zoom calls with you.
You're amazing. And you have such a depth of knowledge. I mean, I will say too, when I run, and running has really taught me how to receive. And the specific practice with that is that, again, you have to do the work, right? You have to show up and do the training. And so I would prepare my body as best as I could for these long races, 50 miles or, 60 miles or whatever. And then as long as I'd done the work and I felt like I had prepared to the best of my ability, in that true spirited way of determination, when I got to the race, I could let go of any expectation. And it was literally like, I'm pointing to my arm, but like I flipped a switch to receive. And it was like, literally, now I'm here to receive. Like, I am here, I've done my preparation, and now I'm going to learn everything from this race. And it may not go at all the way I wanted, but I'm going to receive learning from that as well. And so that, in that way, it's running really taught me how to receive. It's hard to receive when you feel like you have not done the preparation, though, right? So I would imagine with your interviews, you do a lot, like clearly you do a lot of preparation, like you're incredibly well prepared. And then you can be present in the moment because you have this deep reservoir of knowledge and understanding behind you to hold you up. So you embody that. It's amazing to see.
Oh, thank you. There's a word, what book? Strange Man in a Strange Land. It's this like science fiction book, but it has this deep meaning. Somebody once told me it's a book that changed their life, so I read it. But it has a word in there called grok, and it's you'll see it used in the wild now, but I think it came from that book, and it's basically an alien word to mean like deeply understanding to the point of embodying. And it's funny, we don't have that word really, and so some people will just use it and bring it into this world because we need that word, but we can't.
I'm freaking out because I just saw the writer Anne Lamott. I don't know if you know her work, at the Santa Fe Literary Festival 2 nights ago. And she used the word grok. And I was like, and I knew what she meant from context, that it was like a deep understanding, but I'd never heard the word before. So that's so wild that I feel like we're grokking each other, right?
It's all connected. Well, thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you brought to this book. Where can listeners find you and your book?
Okay, you can find me on katiearnold.net. That's my website. And I have all the info about my book. I'm on book tour, so I'm doing readings and events around the country, and you can find that. And I also lead flow retreats, which I call flow camps, which are really about these daily habits, like I talked about, going outside into nature or moving in nature, that we can do every day, anywhere, to cultivate more ease and flow in our lives. So those are my flow camps. That's online. You can buy the book online. Of course, I really encourage everyone to support their local bookstores and buy it from an independent store. If they don't have free flashings in the phenomenal world, they can order it, and you can get it, from your online, the big ones there too. But yeah, everything's on my website, as well as I do a weekly Substack called Work in Process, and it's all about the creative process in writing and running and living.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/353. Your challenge this week is simple. Just go outside your door in the morning. It's so stupid simple that you can't not do it. I get in my routines and I have to consciously build this in sometimes. And I promise you, when you actually do step outside, it's the perfect season, depending on where in the world you are, to actually just get out there, get some fresh air, get sunlight in your eyes. Don't put sunglasses on. Take a few deep breaths, bring your coffee, make it a ritual, and see how your life changes across the next week. Really though, truly, let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. Even better, take a picture of yourself doing it and tag me, mindlovemelissa, and the podcast, Mind Love Podcast. If you haven't signed up for the Morning Mind Love yet, I have a lot of really exciting announcements coming up. So make sure that you sign up at mindlove.com or text the word morning to 33777. You can find all of my amazing sponsors and discount codes at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.